frequently visit the teachings of ancient masters on this show. And of course, many of you have asked why we haven't touched on the teachings of the Buddha. Of course, Buddhism is a vast and deep subject, and one that deserves more than a cursory glance. But I thought what I would do is just give us some introduction to some of the most basic, simple, straightforward ideas that are reflected in some of the Buddhist teaching, so that we can see the commonality with many of the great masters that you've read about or that you've heard about here as well. I mean, certainly one of the consistent things with the teachings of the ancients is that they pretty much generally say the same things as each other. It doesn't seem to matter where or when they came from. Spiritual teachings seem to boil down to some core truths. And so some of those are what I want to introduce from some of the Buddhist teachings today. And the source I'm going to use is a collection of these teachings called the Dhammapadda, which is perhaps considered one of the most important of the original Buddhist texts, collections of his teachings. The word Dhammapadda means the path of Dharma. Maybe we can call that the path of truth, of righteousness, of the central law that all life is one. And that quote comes from Eknath Iswaran, whose translation of Dhammapadda I'm using today to share with you some of these important quotes or sayings that really give us a sense of some of what the Buddha was teaching. It is a great edition, as are all his translations of important Eastern texts. Tells you more about the Buddha himself, Prince Siddhartha, and how he followed his path and became known as the Buddha, and also shares a number of stories about how the teachings evolve and how the Dhammapadda reflects the Buddha's teachings. And most important, as he says, he knows from his own experience that these verses can change our lives. He says, the Buddha did not leave a static structure of his belief that we can affirm and be done with. His teaching is an ongoing path, a way of perfection, and anyone can follow to the highest good. The Dhammapada is a map for this journey, says Iswaran. These verses can be read and appreciated simply as wise philosophy. As such, they're part of the great literature of the world. But for those who would follow to the end, the Dhammapada is a sure guide to nothing less than the highest goal life can offer, self-realization. So we're just going to dip in and touch on some of the very important teachings, as I said, that give us both a sense of Buddhism itself and this shared teaching that seems like all the ancestors, all the ancients want us to know the same things. One of the core ideas of Buddhism is that the mind is both our friend and our enemy. It is the mind through which we achieve everything or nothing, through which everything happens. The Dhammapada has the statement, our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. And that is core to the idea of how the mind creates our sense of reality. In fact, according to these teachings, the mind creates our entire sense of reality. We become what we think. And it's often misinterpreted that we create a world that we want. We can have what we want. We can manifest everything that we want just by virtue of our thinking about it, which in some sense is true. In some sense, it is what that is saying. But of course, the biggest problem is that we don't have control over our minds. And the effort to control our minds is a life's work or many lifetimes' work. As the Dhammapada says, the mind is a battlefield. He says in there, more than those who hate you, more than all your enemies, an undisciplined mind does greater harm. And unfortunately, the disciplining of the mind is easier said than done. But it is the most important thing that we can do for ourselves. So Buddha says, as irrigators lead water where they want, as archers make their arrows straight, as carpenters carve wood, the wise shape their minds. In many ways, it is the only task that we have, is to discipline and shape our minds. Because our life is shaped by our mind, we become what we think. Everything is really all about shaping the mind. Of course, there are core practices that Buddhism offers which guide us in that direction. And one of the most important, if not the most important of those, is meditation. Meditation is, again, something we've discussed on this show a variety of times and will again. In some senses, it's easier said than done, but in most senses, it's really easier done than said. It's really just a question, again, of mastering our minds. We can spend so much time thinking and worrying about it and thinking of it as techniques that I'm doing right or wrong, and letting the mind get too involved, because everything is about the mind. We actually forget that, though. Despite our experience of it, we actually focus our energies into the world. And the greatest challenge is to detach ourselves from the importance of the world and the stuff in it, and our relationships with the people and things, and the emotions that we feel, for better and for worse, that seem so important. The achievements and the goals and everything that we do that seems so important. And in a worldly sense, they are important. But the problem is that the world is impermanent and changing. And that is something that we cannot deal with. We struggle with change. We hold on to things that change. And change is the greatest certainty, as Buddhism itself says. Meditation is the way by which we actually let go of all of that attachment. And Buddha says in Dhammapadda, if you forget the joy of life and get caught in the pleasures of the world, you will come to envy those who put meditation first. And what he's implying there, that if you put meditation first in some way, that's how you find the joy of life. The joy of life is not in the world. It's in the mastery of the mind, which is so important in mastering the world. The very first task we have, according to Buddha, is to understand the Four Noble Truths, which are about suffering. And the first noble truth is that life is suffering. Everyone suffers, everything suffers. Suffering is universal, whether it's caused by loss or pain or sickness or failure, attachment, pleasure and its disappearance in life. Suffering exists and everyone suffers. The second thing is that the cause of suffering is attachment, the desire to have things, to control things. That causes suffering. The cravings and desires for recognition, for fame, for achievement, for avoiding unpleasantness, things like negative emotions, fear, anger, jealousy, all of these sooner or later cause suffering. Even having what we want causes suffering because it's impermanent. We crave more once we've got it. All of that is suffering. The third noble truth is that there is an end to suffering. Attachment can be overcome through achieving nirvana, which is liberation. The mind can experience complete freedom and liberation through non-attachment if it lets go of desire and craving. And the fourth noble truth is, in order to do that, in order to achieve that, you must follow the Eightfold Path. And more about the Eightfold Path at some other time, but the most important thing there is meditation is a path for achieving this. And the first step really is to meditate, to learn to master and discipline the mind. There are other items, tasks on the Eightfold Path, but certainly meditation is the most important and the most accessible. It's the root of all of them. But the starting point in following the path is to know yourself, to be yourself, to be your real self, and to be authentic in the following of the path of Dharma. Buddha says Dharma is not upheld by talking about it, as we are doing. Dharma is upheld by living in harmony with it. He goes on to say, like a lovely flower, full of color, but lacking in fragrance, are the words of those who do not practice what they preach. So it's not about knowing, studying, talking about it like I am now. It's about the doing of it. And it's about you doing it. It isn't about whether they're hearing your message, whether everyone else is doing it. He says, do not give your attention to what others do or fail to do. Give it to what you do or fail to do. Something which the Stoics emphasize repeatedly, that it's really all about where your power lies. The only thing that makes sense is to put your energy into things that you can do. And that is essentially, as far as possible and to a limited extent, control your own life, because other people's lives you have no power over or control over, and they can affect you and you have no power over that. Don't give your attention to what others are or are not doing. It's enough to have to worry about what you're doing, especially since ultimately you are alone on the path. Even the Stoics have said that. Seneca, one of the great Stoics I love to quote, says, retire into yourself as much as possible. Associate only with people who will improve you. Welcome those who you are capable of improving. It's a mutual process. People learn as they teach, which requires you then to only associate with people who are following also a path as you are to self-mastery or self-knowledge. However, the path is lonely. You walk alone. He goes on to say, Buddha goes on to say, if you find no one to support you on the spiritual path, walk alone. There is no companionship with the immature, similar to what Seneca was later saying. And that is, it's only worth walking with people who are equal or greater than you on that path. And something that many, many teachers repeat. Rumi, the great poet, said, stay with friends who support you in these. Talk with them about sacred texts and how you are doing and how they are doing, and keep your practices together. And the teacher, Jim Rohn, said, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. That's something really worth thinking about. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Who do you spend your time with? And where does that put your state of mind, your state of being? Something very much worth thinking about. Ultimately, where we are trying to get to is self-mastery. And self-mastery, this process of disciplining the mind and knowing the self, is what self-mastery is all about. Because once you know yourself and once you are yourself, then nothing else really can affect that or change that. So Dhammapadda says, as a solid rock cannot be moved by the wind, the wise are not shaken by praise or blame. And it's important that it's praise or blame, that either one of those doesn't matter. We don't need the praise any more than we should get the blame. Ultimately, someone else's opinion of you says something about them, not about you. And that's important to understand. It's true for everything around us. The only thing that matters in your own life is how you experience, perceive, and act. A basic concept in Buddhism is that this idea of emptiness, that there is no meaning in the world. The world has no meaning except the meaning that you give it, which might sound a little abstract at first, but think about it. Of course, it makes an enormous amount of sense. The world has no meaning except the meaning which we give it. And you can see, if you look at history and how the meaning of things changes all the time, if you look at different cultures who profoundly assert different meanings for the same things, for the same experiences, for different beliefs, And the variety of human experience and belief and knowledge is evidence of the only meaning that anything has is the meaning that we give it. So then bring that down to a personal level, and never mind the great truths, which we try worry about, which also really depend on us giving them any meaning. But just your everyday life, the importance of the things that you are doing are only important because you give them importance. And it's a great way of also learning to detach, not only to what other people say about you or what you're doing, but to life itself, or I should say from life itself, from those things which cause suffering, and discover the power lies in the self, the mind, the mastery of the self and of the mind. Because if that's where we give meaning to things, then we can start giving meaning to things which are about our self-knowledge and our self-mastery, and are not about the things that cause the suffering. Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the Four Agreements, which many people know about, says in one of them, don't take anything personally. Nothing others do is because of you. What others say and what others do is a projection of their own reality, their dream. When you're immune to the opinions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. Because, as he's saying there, you don't want to be the victim or the product of other people's ideas or dreams. Why are you doing what you do? Who wants you to do that? Who will you please if you do what you do? Who do you disappoint when you do it wrong? Who is actually really dreaming your reality for you? And as long as someone else is, you can never achieve satisfaction or happiness, because things outside you will change. But if you master yourself, if you do what you do because you're projecting your reality onto the world, then you come to know yourself and come to understand how you cause the suffering, because you still cause suffering for yourself if you have those dreams and ideals that we were talking about. But the difference is you have the power then to let go of it by following the Eightfold Path. Big difference when it's someone else's dream. How do you satisfy the dreams of your parents, especially if they're no longer alive? Makes no sense to be satisfying the dreams of your parents. You're here, you've got to do what you've got to do. Buddha says, one who conquers himself is greater than another who conquers 1,000 times 1,000 men on the battlefield. Which does illustrate to us, of course, the difficulty of self-mastery certainly is in there, and reflects something that Jesus himself says, which is, he who rules his spirit has won a greater victory than the taking of a city. And again, since we know that the taking of a city or the conquest of 1,000 men is no easy task, it does reflect the truth of how difficult self-mastery is, but how it's the only thing that we need to do. It is the greatest achievement, because achieving self-mastery means we achieve everything else. Rumi again says, the lion who breaks the enemy's ranks is a minor hero compared to the lion who overcomes himself. Again, using a lion tells us this isn't an easy task, fighting a lion. But the lion fighting himself is an even greater difficulty than the lion fighting anything else, which we know the lion can conquer. Da Vinci, the great artist, said one can have no smaller or greater mastery than mastery of oneself. So I've said that there is the Eightfold Path is how we achieve that mastery. And of course, it's easier said than done. But these are the 8 steps that we need to focus on. The first 2 fall under the category of wisdom or discernment, and they are understanding the Four Noble Truths, which is the right view of this is what life is, what I was saying early on, understanding that life is suffering. And secondly, thinking correctly, following the right path in life, desiring to free ourselves from attachment and ignorance as the only noble goal. So thinking correctly about what the path in life is. The next three are about our morality, about knowing what's right in the greater sense of the word, in the sense of virtue. So the third of the Eightfold Paths: no lying or criticism of others, no condemning, harsh language, gossip, right speech, abstaining from lying or hurtful speech, even about ourselves, which is something that we need to monitor. What do we say about ourselves? What do we think about ourselves? Then we have right action or right conduct, which is not engaging in any hurtful behaviors like killing or stealing or being careless with other people, being hard on other people in any kind of way, or using them in any way. And right livelihood, supporting yourself without harming others, making your living in such a way that is honest and does not hurt any other living beings, not only human beings, all living beings. That's the moral precepts of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then you get to concentration and meditation as the last two of the Eightfold Path, which is right effort, which is about promoting good thoughts, conquering bad thoughts. So that is the exerting ourselves with regards to our thinking and what's going on in our mind, learning to identify and let go of bad thinking or bad action or bad qualities, and developing, enacting, putting into action and nurturing our good qualities. So putting our efforts into the right thing. And finally, mindfulness, becoming aware of the body, of the mind, of the feelings, focusing attention on one's body, one's mind, and one's thoughts in such a way as to overcome cravings, attachment, hatred, and ignorance. And that leads to the eighth of the Eightfold Path, right concentration, meditation. Meditating to achieve higher state of consciousness. Meditating in such a way as to gradually recognize and let go of imperfection, to recognize impermanence, to recognize the unity between ourselves and everything and everyone, that there is only one, that there is no solo isolated path, because everything is one. And how do we achieve that? We achieve that little by little. Little by little, says the Dhammapadda, a person became evil as a water pot is filled by drops of water. Similarly, little by little, a person becomes good as a water pot is filled by drops of water. Every little step helps. Every little drop we add. We don't have to exert some great force to overcome our attachments and our difficulties from the past. Every tiny step helps along the way. And that is important to understand, because sometimes looking at what we need to achieve this right way of thinking and being seems insurmountable. I've had a lifetime of suffering, of attachment, of pain, of drama, of achievement. Little by little, every little thing counts. The Buddha says, make your mind as pure as a silversmith blows away the impurities of silver. Little by little, instant by instant. Think of someone making something out of silver or out of anything, carving out of a rock. Careful, little by little, until you get the most beautiful sculpture that's impossible to imagine. How did that emerge out of a rock? Little by little, slowly, carefully, taking hours to chip away on small things and blowing away the dust, while only the artist can see what lies underneath that rock. But little by little, with time, it's there. And we are the same. Our mind is the same. Our soul is the same. Little by little, we get there. We can perfect ourselves. We can start right now, and doing the tiniest thing puts one drop of water into that pot. That's all you need to do. And as Buddha says in the Dhammapadda, if anything is worth doing, do it with all your heart. a lot of wisdom that we've been exposed to in a short amount of time. Hopefully you can explore further by yourself and start thinking of filling your pot with little drops of right thinking and right action, little by little, until we let go of what causes us suffering and we know ourselves.